HHC. Is it safe? Will it kill you? Let's find out! HHC, hexahydrocannabinol, is a molecule similar to its much better known cousin THC, tetrahydrocannabinol. Like THC, it has some psychoactive effects and it occurs naturally in weed, but only in trace amounts, so it's usually synthesized in a lab. It's basically THC without any double bonds, and in nature it's not actually synthesized by the plant, but it is a product of degradation of delta 9 THC, which is usually the THC stoners are interested in. HHC is often sold as a legal alternative to THC. Although it started appearing in shops in early 2020, it was first synthesized in 1947 by a guy named Roger Adams. But how exactly is it created? There are several ways. After all, this is chemistry and there's some magic involved. I will cover some of the basics, but if you want to read more about it, hexahydrocannabinol and closely related semi-synthetic cannabinoids, a comprehensive review by Istvan Ujirvari, is a good place to start. The structural difference between HHC and THC is just 2 hydrogen atoms, hence the name. To put it simply, it can be made by adding just two hydrogen molecules to THC in a process called hydrogenation. And you may know hydrogenation as the process used, for example, converting vegetable oil into margarine. But HHC doesn't have to be made from THC, and often it's not, since THC tends to be kinda illegal in a lot of places. CBD can be obtained from hemp legally, distilled and isolated and stored as a powder. These steps are fairly easy for an experienced chemist, and the CBD extract can be then used as a basis for the chemical reaction that produces HHC. This method of synthesizing HHC produces different isomers of HHC, and isomers are basically molecules with the same atoms but in a different order, so the two molecules are never mirror images of each other. These isomers have different biological properties as well, and you can think of it as if one was rotating right, which is the R isomer, and the other one is rotating left, the S isomer. And only the one that's looking right seems to be biologically active, effectively binding to the CB1 receptors in your brain. But even if it binds correctly, it's still less efficient than THC, and the goal in HHC production is usually to have 2:1 or 1:1 ratio of active to inactive HHC, else it wouldn't be too much fun because the inactive variant wouldn't do too much to you. Achieving pure active HHC can be costly, and what is actually the ratio you can expect in the goodies you bought? Well, out of more than 60 samples of HHC containing products, the range varied, coming as low as 15% to as high as 70%, and it depends on the manufacturing process and the chemicals used, and shows that at the moment you're sort of playing the lottery. HHC can also be made from a terpene citronellol, which can be found in various plants and is also used as a fragrance, even though you probably shouldn't use Febreze to create HHC at home. And again, these were just some examples of how HHC can be obtained, but chemistry is pretty complex and who knows what sort of magic was used to create whatever you're about to smoke. Because parts of the plants are used and HHC sometimes can appear naturally, HHC is considered to be semi-synthetic rather than purely synthetic. The lack of double bonds also gives it a great shelf life, and at 96% purity, you can expect about 6 to 12 months. You can then apply the manufacturer's HHC to legal forms of weed with low THC content, blessing it with some psychotropic properties. So you can literally take hemp that does nothing to you if you smoke it, spray it with some HHC juice, and get high from it. The good news is, hemp usually contains other phytocannabinoids, which also play a role when you smoke weed, such as CBDA and CBD, which have actually shown some protective properties against some of the negative effects, such as paranoia. You can also use the HHC extract in other manners, such as vape pens, e-liquids, and e-liquid cartridges. These notably lack the other protective phytocannabinoids that a flower would contain. You can also find HHC in various edibles such as gummies and brownies, although anecdotal evidence shows that HHC might not be as pleasant when eaten. The products are often flavored and try to appeal to younger people. It's also quite possible to buy HHC as an oil, which can be applied orally just as you would with a CBD oil. Sometimes these products are marked as not for human consumption or as collector items, and to be fair, there has also been some evidence of selling HHC products as THC products on the illicit market. The fun thing is, you can buy HHC products without any sort of regulation in a lot of countries, including vending machines. No, there's nothing stopping your every 6-year-old from buying some nice HHC-filled vapes, except for maybe the price, which I found to be around 40 euros. And HHC was also found as a contaminant in some of the other cannabinoid products, so it's quite possible you've already ingested some, especially if you use Delta H THC products. So, what can you actually expect from smoking this new legal weed alternative? HHC wasn't really given too much thought in the lab, since labs generally have better ways of spending money, so there's a lot of evidence that is anecdotal. There are some mice getting high, and their doses were massive, like up to 10 milligrams per kilogram of their body weight. And they also got so high they exhibited some reduced spontaneous activity and pain relief, even if it was a little bit lower than what Delta 9 THC would provide. There was also ataxia present in dogs, which is just a fancy word for a lack of coordination. And by the way, don't give drugs to dogs, they can't metabolize them as humans do. The research in the pharmacology and toxicology areas in humans has not really been done yet, and the anecdotal effects are similar to the ones caused by Delta 9 THC. Some people report that they feel full of energy, their brain is working at full speed. Physical pain may be reduced or disappear completely. Anecdotally, it might also cause less anxiety and paranoia, arguably because it's less potent than THC, and some people swear it doesn't give them uncontrollable munchies. It has been hypothesized that HHC might help with chronic pain, lack of sleep, nausea, and vomiting, but again, more research is absolutely necessary to support any of these claims. Unfortunately, the data on the HHC is limited, and just like THC, it's supposed to make you feel high. But let's say you really want to smoke weed, but you also really need to pass a drug test. Is HHC your savior? Well, if you're taking a drug test, chances are it's going to be a test based on your urine. The urine drug tests are usually not looking for THC specifically, but for the byproducts of its metabolism. Since HHC is currently not researched that well, it cannot be said for sure whether it will trigger a drug test. However, you can probably expect some of the metabolites to be similar to the THC byproducts, and I don't think you should risk it. Plus, you can never be too sure whether the underlying hemp actually had some THC on its own. HHC can also show up in a saliva test, and while if you've been smoking HHC exclusively, it might not show on a saliva test, you can never be too sure about cross-contamination anyway. Also, even if HHC was not detectable, don't drive stoned. Your reflexes are probably way off and you help literally no one. The exact period of time any drug will stay in your body depends on your specific situation, including how frequently you use. Cannabinoids have a tendency to build up in cells, and this buildup grows the more you use and the more often you use. And the more you have stored, the longer it will take the drug to leave your body. Your individual metabolism also plays a role in this, as do other health conditions, especially anything that's wrong with your natural detoxification plans, such as your liver or your kidneys. It also depends on the way you ingest cannabinoids. In general, if you eat it, it stays for longer, or at least there was some small difference in saliva testing. And remember when I told you alcohol is hydrophilic, meaning that it gets diluted in water, and that gives it certain differences between effects it has on men and on women. Well, phytocannabinoids are lipophilic. They like fatty stuff. That's why you dissolve them in butter or margarine if you wanted to make edibles. Your body also has fat cells, whether you like it or not. You might also want to think about it if you have higher body fat percentage, as cannabinoids are stored in fat cells, so the more fat cells you have, the more cannabinoids are waiting around. Other factors include your age and stress levels, with older people taking actually longer to get rid of the cannabinoids. In general, Cannabinoids stay in the body for 4 to 6 weeks, but the research on HHC specifically is limited. If you're a light or one-time user, you probably shouldn't smoke weed for at least a couple of weeks before taking the test. But if you're a daily user, the only test you should be taking is to check whether your drugs are clean enough for safe consumption. Seriously, just consider other options. You're not passing any tests anytime soon. And what are some risks of using HHC? Well, firstly, there are some pretty standard side effects such as dry mouth, fatigue, reduced appetite, or increased appetite, increased heart rate, red eyes, dizziness, paranoia, anxiety, the standards show. There seems to be little evidence that it would negatively affect your heart and cause you to go into cardiac arrest, and it also should not be cytotoxic to the liver. It was also not found mutagenic, which means that HHC alone has not been proven to cause cancer. But you usually don't get HHC in your body. You also get some of the residual chemicals from the lab, and these can be mutagenic. The lab environment is not the body, and in vitro studies do not necessarily have to translate to in vivo. And also, some slight toxicity was found to the lung fibroblasts, even though, again, this was in a lab and more research is definitely necessary. And then there are the other standard risks psychoactive substances usually come with, such as higher risk of injury, or getting into car accidents if you smoke and drive, developing dependency, lowering your productivity at home or at work. It's also ill-advised to use vapes or cannabis and cannabis-related substances to save your lungs the trouble. Plus, you can never be sure what you're buying. When I worked on my thesis about e-cigarettes and e-liquids, I was surprised that a lot of labels showed the nicotine levels completely wrong on the label, and even advertised nicotine-containing liquids as nicotine-free. So I imagine the situation isn't that different with HHC liquids. And then you have the risks that are brought by the manufacturing process. Harsh chemicals are used in the labs, and the purity of the final product should be questioned. Your HHC product might come with heavy metals such as palladium, platinum, and nickel. And while testing is required by cannabis law for arsenic, mercury, lead, and cadmium, palladium and platinum is not. Contamination with other chemicals, even silicon, was found. You cannot tell whether your weed is contaminated, only lab tests can confirm that. And you might also not want to smoke it when pregnant, as it can lower your baby's weight, but that goes for most drugs. HHC has a bit longer takeoff, so it can be easier to overdose on it, and you will have a pretty unpleasant trip, hopefully not to the hospital. But overall, we don't really know too much about the risks of taking HHC. What is the market like? What is the pharmacological and toxicological profile? What are the exact metabolic pathways? Is there an acute or chronic toxicity? How does HHC interact with other substances? Well, we don't really know yet. In many countries, HHC is not regulated at all, meaning that young and inexperienced adolescents or even children can buy the drug without too many problems, which is, of course, a pretty big problem. Also, there are no regulations for the lab process that results in the creation of HHC, so no one is checking whether there are any residual and potential dangerous chemicals left behind, such as the heavy metals mentioned earlier. There's also no regulations for the people who sell the product, so God knows what you're actually buying. And let's not forget that HHC is a drug that is in many ways similar to THC, and there's always the potential of developing a substance use disorder. I found the information about HHC is currently quite limited research-wise, and when you Google it, a lot of information is from people trying to sell the product, which I'd say can be some pretty unreliable narrators. On the positive side, there's a lot of potential research to be done in areas such as cancer treatment and other treatments, possibly Alzheimer's. We will see about that. So, HHC emerged in the States in early 2020s, and in December 2022, the European Monitoring Center for Drugs and Drug Addiction had a meeting regarding HHC. It was recently banned for production, sale and use on French territory, Denmark, Belgium, Austria, Sweden and Italy in summer 2023. There were also seizures of the products, and in May 2022, HHC was identified in 70% of the EU member states. There also have been other semi-synthetic cannabinoids out there in smaller quantities than HHC. Recently, HHC analogs appeared on the market such as HHCP and HHCO. Both differ in their ability to bind to your cannabinoid receptors, but in general, you can expect similar results, just different strengths. However, these acetate analogs might actually be worse for your health. And if you remember the lung injuries in 2019 caused by vitamin E acetate, there's suspicion that these HHC acetates might also create reactive catin when heated and damage your lungs. So what can I say to sum this up? Is HHC a problem? Well, I think HHC is a symptom of a problem. And that problem is that while cannabis was originally made illegal mostly due to political reasons and not for public health reasons, more bad than good has come out of the prohibition. The banning of marijuana led to the development of the black market, the emergence of stronger and potentially more dangerous skunk strains, imprisonment of many people who did nothing wrong, and the market is flooded with synthetic and semi-synthetic alternatives we knew very little about, except that some of them are probably not good at mimicking the effects of weed and are dangerous to your health. But the topic of prohibition, its advantages and disadvantages, is something I don't have the space to cover here, and I'd like to talk about it in some more specialized video. So if you're interested in more topics from addiction treatment and prevention and deep dives into various substances, give me a follow and I promise I'll make more videos. Thank you for watching.